And the truth is, right, and maybe people won't like that I'm about to say this, but the person who triggers you, it's not their responsibility. And that's not just personally. It doesn't matter if it was intentional or unintentional. Like, you are responsible for how you respond or how you react to what somebody says or does to you.
Hi, this is Doug Poirier with the next episode of Thundercast, and today I am here with Danielle Blackmore, and she is an emotional intelligence coach, and she's quite extraordinary. In my little pregame with her, she gave me a lot of good information, so I'm hoping that you guys can all get value as well. Danielle, how are you today?
Oh my God, doing swell. Thank you for asking.
Swell? No one uses swell anymore. Is that part of emotional intelligence?
Oh, it's fun. It's a fun word. Very light. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I really am. I'm a little fluffy after the holidays. I'm still trying to get the weight off, but otherwise I'm doing extraordinarily well.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I think January is always the time where people like I'm doing dry January, right? Where I'm like, okay, let me take something away and like try to focus on being good.
Yeah, I would have to say I'm doing wet January. Lots of margaritas in the last week. So, yeah. All right. So let's dive right into it. So you just gave me a really good explanation of what emotional intelligence is and what being an emotional intelligence coach is. If you could share that with the audience, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I even get into that, I do want to just highlight that emotional intelligence is a really intimidating term for people. Well, where people hear it and they're like, oh my God, like I'm not emotional and I'm definitely not intelligent about emotion. So they shut down where they're like, that could never be me. But like, I just want to assure anybody who's listening to this podcast that, yeah, like you have emotional intelligence. So I just want to start by kind of empowering people with that level of authority. And so what emotional intelligence really is it's the ability to listen to your emotions. And it's from that ability, you're able to then manage your emotions. So I say that, really emphasize that, because a lot of people think, oh, I can read a book and then I understand it, but emotions are really different. Like you can read a book and get some intellectual understanding, but the way emotions work is that like you have to feel it, you have to experience it, and you have to do it. So reading is not always enough. Like you have to really get into the experience of it.
You just triggered a question in my brain. How does emotional intelligence tie into empathy?
Oh, such a great question. Okay. So what happens with empathy is a lot of people think they're being empathetic when they're not truly being empathetic. So you have to be able to truly feel emotions yourself first before you can then be able to recognize what emotional experience someone else is having, right? And you don't have to have had that exact experience of another person, but you do have to be able to recognize like, wow, I would be so grief stricken if I lost my mom or if I lost my cat. And I don't totally or truly know exactly what that experience is like for you, but I can kind of understand and recognize a little bit of what you might be going through. And I'm here for you. Right. And it's not about like, because the sympathy is like, oh my God, I'm right there with you. Empathy is like, I could totally relate if I was you and I have an idea of what that experience would be like, but I am just really acknowledging you for what you're going through right now.
Right. I heard a great explanation of what empathy is once, and I'd be fascinated to see if you agree with it. So the way it was explained to me is there's three flavors of empathy, right? There's reactive empathy, which is like you see someone else get hurt, and so you're like, ooh, right? So you react to it. There's cognitive empathy, which is the ability to recognize the emotion that someone else is having. And then there's emotional empathy, which is like, oh my God, someone's grief stricken, and you feel that in your body as well. And really, that's the distinction. Like, most people don't have a lot of emotional empathy. We have cognitive empathy, and that allows manipulators to manipulate us. But people who tend to have emotional empathy don't manipulate, or manipulate a lot less, because they're feeling what you feel and it's uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love the way that you kind of like, however that explanation broke it up, because that's so true. And I think a lot of people get tricked where they have more cognitive empathy and they think they have emotional empathy, but they don't. And I'm just going to give you an example.
Sure.
So I used to be a person who I judged people when they would grieve their pets passing, because I used to think like, oh, it's an animal. Like, come on, like I understand it's sad. And I had fake empathy where I was like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And then my beloved cat died. And I was like so grief stricken. And I was like, oh my God, this is what
Right.
these other people experience, right? And so
Right.
like, so empathy, it is something that like might you have to accumulate it, right? Like it's not like I could choose that experience, but it was like, wow, now I get it.
Right. I think that our capacity for empathy can grow, but I think most of us are born with it. And I think like women really have a lot of cognitive empathy. Like you guys can spot someone across the room and just like know what's going on with them. And most us guys walk around and we're just oblivious. We just are, I think. And maybe that's the way we're raised, or maybe it's genetic. I don't know. But I've just found that women have a lot more cognitive empathy than guys do.
They've been allowed to.
I guess the way of looking at it. But it's definitely a superpower. And I think that ties into part of emotional intelligence. But one of the things that you just said about emotional intelligence before we got on here that was really interesting to me, because when you first said it, I wanted to disagree with you. But then as you explained it, it made a lot of sense, which is you look at emotional intelligence, we're all thinking, well, what's the other person feeling? But really, it's like, what's going on in here inside of us, and why is that happening? That's like that self-awareness, right? Could you explain a little more about that?
Yes. So what tends to happen is the way I teach emotions is that you already have so many emotional experiences that you haven't processed yet from being a little kid. And what happens is most people, because they are so focused and trained to listen to other people, they don't realize that, like, okay, wait a minute. In order for me to really show up and be my full self and my true self, I have to recognize what my experiences are. And how I do that is to learn how to listen to my feelings. And how you do that is to listen to the sensations in your body when you think of some kind of memory from the past. And then to identify an emotion to like make sense of, oh, wow, that was what I was feeling during that moment. Because what can happen is people always compare themselves to like other experiences. So like we've all maybe heard of the Tony Robbins story of like he was so broke and he had no money, was living in a car, and then he had this amazing strength to like go to a seminar and raise money, and now he's really successful. And maybe people are like, well, I don't know, how can I be like that? Or I want to be like that, but that's not me. And they'll do the same with like, there's starving children in Africa and I should be grateful for what I have, but they can't. And that's because your experiences, right? I'm not even going to say your emotions, your experiences are different and unique. And the way that you own that is to go inward and to be able to listen so that you can own that and see like, okay, that's somebody else's experiences and this is mine.
Right. It's funny when you say that, it makes me think about my own journey, because I know that when I was younger, when things would happen to me, like we don't even have to pick an example, but I would get upset and I would think that upset was something that someone else did or that was external to me. But really, when you really look at big upsets, I think, this is my humble opinion, inside relationships, those upsets and those injuries come from traumas in our past, usually our childhood. And there's been so much time between the original event and now, we've just lost track of where it started, because I think everybody has those moments where we just completely overreact to something. And that's usually an indicator to me when I do it, that's an indicator to me that, wow, that's a trauma.
Yeah, and you're already like way ahead of the curve, and I commend you for having so much awareness about that experience, right? Because most people, they don't recognize how deep it goes, and they just think it's the situation in front of them. They just think it's that current relationship and that's the issue without realizing and following those kind of breadcrumbs and having the courage to go that far back and be like, wow, there's a pattern here, right?
Right.
Or, right, that comes from my mom.
Yeah. Right. I know for me, like it can be onion and it can be so disheartening because I went through this process of trying to understand why I would experience the emotions and have the thoughts and reactions that I were having that were so negative. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that almost nothing I'm experiencing and negatively or even positively, I guess you could say, from other people had anything to do with them. Right. Which is a really hard thing to accept. Right. Because at that point, it's like, wow, I'm miserable or I'm unhappy right now because of me. Right. And that's, you have to learn how to not take it as blame. Right. It's like, it is what it is. It's pre-programming. Now that you can see where it is and what it is, then maybe you can work on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of so people get really tripped up. Like most people don't think of relationships or let me say emotions. It really is. They don't think of emotions as like something that they own or something that's their responsibility. They think of it in terms of like someone made me feel that way. And we talk about that like all the time. You hear it just conditioned on the radio of like, all these singers singing about how like it was his fault, it was their fault. And that's like actually really commendable that you were able to recognize that in yourself because it is so much the way that we're brought up to think about emotional experiences, right? And that's where kind of I said before, where we're taught to listen to other people. We're taught to think like that person, like I'll always be in love with that person. I can't control it. I can't let it go. And they feel really disheartened about it.
Right. You just triggered another question in me. So let's talk about, like, because this goes into the societal emotional intelligence that we were talking about earlier as well. So we live in a culture where if someone feels offended, they feel they have the right to behave or to shut you down in a way or tell you you're not allowed to express yourself. And you can understand some of these things. There is such a thing as being harassed, right? But if you're expressing an opinion that someone else hates and they say, oh, that's violence, right? So that's a manipulation. That kind of dovetails a little bit, I think, into what you were just saying. How does what you do, translate on a broader societal level? Like when you see people behaving that way, because to me, it seems incredibly unhealthy, especially because it shuts down dialogue. I get a lot of questions, so I'll stop there. More questions after that.
No, that's fantastic. And I love that you brought that up because like didn't that become so apparent in I mean it's apparent everywhere. You actually can't get away from it and it's very scary actually to be yourself because there's so many polarized opinions and so much judgment that people have where it's like you don't know if someone very quickly you could say one little thing and somebody's going to think something totally different about you. So the way that this stuff plays out in society is I think people misunderstand what makes them who they are, right? Where they think their opinion makes them who they are. And your opinion might not have even come from you, right? So there's unfortunately this way that people go about life where they're not really asking themselves like why do I think that, why do I feel that, why does that bother me so much, and there's that lack of accountability emotionally. So people are actually kind of protecting themselves through their opinions and through their judgments and not really exploring any more deeply because I think they're focusing on the things that they really can't control in life. Like you can't control politics, you can't control who wins an election, and really you can't control other people, but somehow we have this skewed belief that like we can through our opinions. And that's where it's really important to be able to step back and own your own experience because that is really the only thing that you can control.
I think you nailed it. I like how you said this because it's a protection mechanism for people, right? Because they're having this experience, this emotion that they think is outside of them. It's like that. It's like the cat. You ever hear the analogy about a cat? When a cat is sick, it cannot register the fact that it may be injured internally. So it instantly thinks that the pain is being caused by an external source. So if you come near an injured cat, it's going to lash out at you thinking that you're causing the pain.
Mm. Oh,
Has
that's
no ability to self-reflect, even physically. Cats can't do that. I don't know if that's really true. That's just the analogy that I'd heard. I think that that's what it is with a lot of people. They're so, I don't know a better word for it. I don't want to cast judgment on it. They're so injured. They're so traumatized that they can't look, inside to see that the pain is actually originating inside of them, as opposed to someone just making a comment or even a political comment. It's like, I vote for so-and-so, and someone, people just get triggered, right? And we call it triggered. And that's just a way of saying it's an external source, right? Which I think is inaccurate.
Yeah, and I love that you're getting at this because it's so true that so people are not recognizing, and you can look at this like an emotional law or the law of the way that like emotional interactions work, where let's say, okay, politically, personally, whatever, somebody triggers you, right? And I know that there are all these like quote unquote, like, oh no, like here's my warning, like there's a trigger warning, something potentially traumatizing is about to come up. And the truth is, right? And maybe people won't like that I'm about to say this, but the person who triggers you, it's not their responsibility. And that's not just personally. It doesn't matter if it was intentional or unintentional. Like you are responsible for how you respond or how you react to what somebody says or does to you.
Right.
I look at that as that's a law that you can't change.
It's tough to get that. Like, I think that's the first lesson everyone has to know. And I always try to phrase it, because I think that there are some arguments to be made in some environments, like a professional environment or work environment. You can't walk away from people. And I think that if you're in a situation that you don't like, but you can walk away, they're allowed to say what they say, have their opinion, unless they're following you. But that's called harassment. That's different, right? So if you become triggered by something someone says, just walk away. And it's hard, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because I think people chase that because they mistake that like, well, if I can change them and what they think and what they say, then I'll feel better. And that's not really how it works.
I'm going to take that one step further. I think for a lot of people, and this was true for me, like sometimes I would take it offensively and I would be hurt. And so I just needed the satisfaction of getting them back. Right. And no one wants to admit that they do that. Right. And I'll tell you, it's even hard for me to admit it, but I so many times, I would just try to humiliate them.
No, but Doug, I have to tell you, commend you for your rawness and your transparency because that is the exact position that so many people are finding themselves in right now. Because what you're highlighting is like being in a state of vengeance or like, so that humiliation and that blame energy, right?
Right.
And what people have to choose, and this is so difficult, and people cognitively think that they've done this and they haven't, is you have to choose to go from vengeance state to forgiveness.
Right. Or at the very least, walk away. Don't escalate. That's my mantra, right?
Fair.
Don't escalate. If I'm upset, I know if I speak when I'm upset, the likelihood that I'm going to escalate is going to be very high. So I just try to walk away, right?
That level of grace, though, yes, is such a great start. You don't have to fix it, change it, like just you in that situation. It's just having self-respect for you and like, you know what? Goodbye.
Right. And I think my most recent thing is like, I'm really done worrying or caring what other people think. I can't control them. No one can, right? So why care? Know who you are, respect yourself. You know who you are. What does it matter, right? Because if they don't like you, they already don't like you. Or if they've just decided in this moment they don't like you, you can't change their opinion, right? And why work toward it? I think that people respect you more if you don't try. If you walk away, it's like, I get self-respect. I don't need to talk to you. I think they respect that far more than someone trying to suck up to them or convince them that they're a good person.
Right. To add to your point as well, I think what people miss is to be liked for your values, or like to have relationships not based on like your personal, do they like me? Do they not like me? But like your integrity, right? Like what you stand for as a person, the kind of person you are, because maybe people won't like it, right? But that's where you have the chance of like, well, I don't really care if you like it or not, but like this is what I'm about. Like I embody patience, or I embody like just being transparent, even if you don't like what I'm saying or not. And that's really a good place to then determine like who you should like spend your time around or not, is those values.
Yeah, so there's a good thing we should talk about. So when in your coaching, right? When you talk to people, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear your opinion. When you're coaching people and you're like, all right, who's in your immediate circle? What do you say to them about their immediate circle of friends and colleagues that makes a difference in their life?
That's a great question. And it's interesting, I actually don't directly ask that question, but relationships inevitably, when you're talking about anything emotional, is going to come up. And what tends to happen, and I can share this without, because I'm not divulging anything personally, but what I tend to notice in my clients is that they're at a place where they want to grow, they want to do more, and they're finding that the people around them have bad habits, or they're just not like good people to be around. Maybe they grew up with these people, or so they're in a place of not having clarity about the quality of the people that they're being around, and the treatment. But they're starting to have that awareness of like, I don't know, it's always been this way and it can't stay this way. So what I say, I guess, about the inner circle, and this is really difficult for people, is that you have to, because sometimes it's blood family members that are in that inner circle, right? Or maybe it's like someone who you call your best friend, and because you've known them for like 10, 20 years, right? And they were your best friend, it doesn't mean that relationship is current. So I guess the first thing I really invite people to consider is like, is that person really acting in the role of a parent, or is that person really acting in the role of a best friend, right? Because people, kind of unconsciously have that best friend or have that parent, but the action is not lining up to the role. And so that's the first thing, is I don't tell them, right? But I just kind of invite them to question like, what do these people act like? And is that really like the same thing as what a mom would do, or what a best friend would do, or is it different?
Right. I think so many points about that. So when I started 4 years ago, and I started on this journey, and this has happened to me in my life several times naturally, but I was talking to various coaches, and I was going to various masterminds, and I was doing a lot of reading, and they all have a version of this. But they said, the more successful you are, the more lonely you will be. All right, necessarily, because what happens is the toxic people fall away, or you have to chase them away. But more than that, and this is the real hard part, right? Because we all start off, most of us, and most people still do this. We define ourselves by the company we keep, the friends we have. I know I'm a good person because so-and-so likes me. I know I'm good at this because so-and-so agrees with me. And we have to find the people in our lives that are already where we want to be, right, in some way, shape, or form, and strengthen those bonds. And this is the hard part, because it's not that you don't care about these people. It's not that you don't love these people, but there are a lot of people in your life that they're not doing it on purpose. And some of them are. They're holding you back, right? Because they're taking up your time and your energy and maybe your finances, right? And they'll naturally fall away. I stopped contacting a lot of friends, and it was interesting to see the ones that didn't contact me and the ones that did. But even a lot of the ones that did, I kind of let fall away. And not that they won't come back into my life. It's just they need to be performing at a higher level themselves, because you only have so much time in a day to talk to people. You only have so much energy to give. And there's a saying that I really like. You are like the 5 closest people you hang around most with. And I think that that's entirely true. So if you want to be successful at any endeavor, whether it's financial, emotional, or relationships, you need to hang around people that already have those qualities.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways there. And just to kind of share maybe a different perspective, because I totally understand. And that's, where a lot of people, the point that they get to where they're like, man, like it's hard to let people go. But really, it's like you're in your absence, you're just being loving because for what you said is like, I have to move on and this isn't working. And, maybe you can think of your relationships like a solar system, where you have relationships that have been close to you and then they go kind of far away, maybe as far as Pluto. Maybe they'll get lost and never come back. But it's like, if they change, then you'll be open-minded.
Yeah. I mean, people, you will see them again. You'll hang out with them, occasionally. But I think the most important thing about that whole explanation is that you're not helping them either. Because if you're in a relationship with somebody and it's holding you down, you're also holding them down because you've agreed to be on that level. And what I have noticed, and this has taken years, it's crazy how long this has taken. People start gravitating back and like, oh my God, look at your life. Look what you've done. Look at all this stuff. And there's a measure of respect there that wasn't there before. And now they want to be there. And when people want to be in your life, they behave differently. And that actually elevates them, right? Not that you're responsible, but empowers them to go, hey, I can do the same thing, right? And I think that's important. It's healthy. I think it's really healthy to set those boundaries with people.
And I think that's a really great point you bring up as well. And it made me think of two things. One is it sounds like the way that you're describing it, it's been really healthy, where it's like the people, they were like, man, I got to catch up to Doug, which is like, man, you changed some people for the better, which is, just.
I don't want to sound like a narcissist here. I'm a dumpster fire and I got a couple of things correct. And I was just thinking this the other day, right? I know a lot of people who in the personal growth sphere, right, they're about personal growth and doing personal growth. And it's my personal opinion that personal growth is agony. It's agony. If it's not agony, you're not doing it right because it requires that you focus on parts of yourself that you don't want to look at. And you have to admit things to yourself that you're like, oh my God, you don't want to admit because we're constantly lying to ourselves. We all think we're better than we are. We all think we're good people and we never do anything wrong and we're all the victims. It's like, you know what? That's not the truth. And I see people in the personal growth sphere and they're just living their best life and they're drinking and they're meeting people and they're dating. And it's like, are you really growing? Is there really personal growth there? Just on a party journey,
Well, I would be careful about that because I see it both ways where I understand that, like, yes, you need to be focused, but you know what, at the same time, and as someone who's also like on this personal growth journey, I mean, it's challenging. Sometimes it's like, you have to have highs to balance out the lows and like, it's okay. And this is, I might be different than other people you'll speak to about this, but I've had to learn this along my personal journey, which is like, yeah, like work really hard, right? Be focused, be into what you're doing, but have balance and make sure that you make time to live, right? And to live in the moment that you're in, which is like, if you have an opportunity to like go to that band, go to that concert, doesn't mean you're being irresponsible. But I guess what I'm saying is the way that I help people is I make sure that I'm living my life to understand that sometimes people need to live theirs too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't mean to sound so negative about it. I just think that when you grow, that moment that you have that growth, it's usually almost always after some significant amount of realization, which is hard and often painful. But it's not that there's no fun on the other side of it, right? There's usually a lot of relief and a lot of, oh my God, I can do this, and a lot of success that can follow some of these breakthroughs, right? But if you never are challenged, if you're never looking at those parts of yourself where you have to be like, oh my God, that problem, I created that problem. That's me. That's hard. That's really what I'm talking about. And I see so many people, they just kind of skirt around that or they just never address it at all. And, I'm not being judgmental. I just think that, it's, how do I say it? It's hard. It's just hard, right? And I think that there's a lot of people out there that they want the image of working on myself, right? And I think those are the people you need to stay away from the most because they're on a different path at the moment, to put it politely.
Yeah, right. People are avoiding doing that dirty work and that hard work. And that's, yeah, like that's a problem. If you're just like avoiding and going out to drink and have a good time and wow, look at how great my life is, and it's not great, that's not good.
All right, so let's talk about something controversial. This is more for me, but so I know a lot of coaches. I know a lot of coaches. All right. So I have a love-hate relationship with coaches. Okay. Coaches that work really work. Okay. And they're usually targeted. The more targeted you are, like you're an emotional intelligence coach, you're going to have a higher rate of success than someone just like, I'm just a general coach, sign up for me and pay me $2,000 a month and your life will be great. You know, I've seen other people like you can get a personal trainer. Well, they're a type of coach, and the type of success that you can get out of that is very measured. You know whether it's working or not, and it often works really well because there's goals and strategies, and you can see it in real time. And then there are coaches that are like, I'm a coach and we're going to talk for 45 minutes every week and I'm going to charge you $2, $3, $4, $5,000 a month. And not a lot happens. And I think that there are toxic coaches out there. And one of the things that I try to enlighten people about is make sure that you like your coach. And if you don't, like, look, if you're in 2-3 weeks and you're not seeing anything, get out immediately. Get out immediately. Stop wasting your money and your time. And I just made a post this the other day that most people, like, they go to coaches, they don't need a coach and they spend thousands of dollars and they don't do anything, right? A lot of times, you know, people are just looking for an attaboy or an attagirl, right? Good job. You can get that from your friend. Your parents will do that, right? So if you're going to have a coach, right, make sure you're very specific about the goals and that you have the right coach for those goals. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're just kind of opening like the can of worms of that whole industry. And I also have a hate love relationship with it. Like even, just to kind of share, like when I reached out to you, you're like, oh, coach, like coach is it's a bad word, I'm trying to get away from it now, but like, so it's just a really gray industry, right? And there's a lot of, I think it's just really hard to define right now, but the thing that the way that I look at coaching, or the way that I at least like explain myself to people, is it's kind of like people can go pay for a really expensive coaching program and they have their certification and they think they're helping people, but they're not applying it to themselves, or they haven't really gone through their journey, or they haven't done the work. So the thing that like I know beyond, my experience and, my certifications or what have you, is that I continuously do the work and I stay very current to like my growth emotionally and personally. And that's how I know I'm always serving people, because what I find in coaching is you get a lot of crazy stuff. You get like spiritual advisors, you get like, so there's all this crazy stuff like somatic, you get, and there's good, but there's also like coaches who, with this appearance and images, who are like, hey, look at my amazing life. I live in Bali and I have this Louis Vuitton bag and you can have it too, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
yeah. And that's a problem, because what that, in my opinion, like I really stand against that, because like that's making somebody, life is externally, like life is really difficult right now. Like this stuff financially, politically, like it's very uncertain times. And people are just on their phones, right? Like it's not like maybe when you were growing up, you didn't have a phone and you sat on the school bus and you watched an icicle melt, where today people are like in the same situation, but with a phone, and they're looking outside of themselves at this major influencer, right? And they think it's truth. And people are very smart about like their sales and the almost like manipulative marketing to make themselves better and greater than they are.
It should be illegal. There's a guy in California. He had a mock-up of a private jet built in his basement, and he rents it out for like $300 an hour, so influencers can take pictures on it, like they're flying to Dubai. And he just, apparently it's like booked out for 2 months. Like he's too many people who want to use it, and I think it's manipulative.
And that's so funny. And it's so true what you're saying about the jet and like, and that's all it is it's picture. It's not like reality of their lifestyle. And it's funny. I just read this article from the New York Post. It was saying how these influencers are actually creating in young people what's called like a financial dysmorphia, where they have this. I can send you the article. It's really interesting, but it's essentially saying all these young people think like, yeah, like they have unrealistic expectations about like they can earn by certain periods in their life. And it's like, the financial advisors and people who are like writing the article and looking at it are like, these kids have to realize that these influencers might not be real.
Right. Excuse me. I was going to say something on that note. So I'm a small business owner, and I'm networking with business owners all the time. And so I will join certain coaching circles just so I can kind of meet other business owners, right? And sometimes I get business, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I find people that I use, sometimes I don't. But one thing that seems to be absolutely ubiquitous, everyone is pretending to have more money than they have.
Right.
Right? Everybody. And it's so interesting. It's so interesting. And you can tell because when it comes down to their spending habits, you can tell immediately. Immediately. So it's so transparent and it's so damaging. It is so damaging to their reputation when they do that, when they pretend to be more than they are. And then you see how absolutely frugal they are. And it's not because that they're good financially, it's because they're not good financially. And yeah, so it's so dangerous out there, and I think that there's a lot of people making a lot of money in the coaching industry that are not serving anybody but themselves, and I just want listeners just to be discerning about that.
And I love that you really bring that up and bring light to it, because I think what happens is there's a lot of people who are on the phone, right? And it's only them, right? They're by themselves and they're consuming this information, and they're not like, they don't have any other like evidence or anyone else look at it with them and be like, don't you see through that person? They're phony, right?
Right. Most people don't know. They think it's so far removed from them. I'll give you an example of a good coach that I know, Stacy Rasky, Influential Inc. And her value add is so enormous because it's not just her being a coach. She's got a whole network of people that you get to work with. You have a whole website, and there's all these videos and all these things that you can do. And you can actually, what I like about her system is that it goes in many directions, and you can choose the one that serves you most, right? Without going really deep into everything that she does. And so the value add there is enormous because you don't have to wait to talk to her. You can just log into her portal and just watch videos on a certain thing with other experts, whether it's hypnotism or breathing, all stuff that's incredibly effective. And so that's a massive value add. And then you see these coaches out there, they just call you or you call them, hopefully they answer. And because I've been through that where coaches, blew me off. And yeah. So, and then, yeah, it's just, I'm losing my train of thought, but it's just, there's so many things that are amazing out there, and there are so many good coaches. And if you're in the audience and you're listening to this, just do your due diligence, ask your questions, ask what resources are available, because if all you get is a phone call, it may not be perfect for you. But there are some people that are great at that too. There's no doubt. There are some people that are great at that, but they're few and far between in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, what I will say, in spite of all the noise in coaching and in spite of all the negativity, like why I choose to be a coach and why I do what I do, it's kind of a blend of like entrepreneurship and just being able to allow people to be their full selves. It allows me to have a relationship. And the difference between, like, let's say like myself and a therapist is like therapists have a lot of red tape where they can't really meet someone where they're at. But like, that's why I choose to be a coach and not a therapist, is because I really can allow someone to be deeply just allowed to be themselves and creative and be like open with me. And that's what really allows for the transformation. And they know that I care, right?
Yeah.
It's like I deeply, like, I don't do anything half-assed. Like I go 110%. And like that's what the industry does allow me to do, but it's a shame when people kind of take advantage of that that those gray areas or that freedom in it and use it for subversive purposes.